Okay, welcome to Lecture 10B. So we've already learned about the many reforms made by Mikhail Gorbachev in the 1980s, which led to quite a few changes for the Soviet Union. Well, changes like perestroika, glasnost, and a newfound openness to democratic ideas will lead to the eventual breaking up of the Soviet Union. By 1991, the USSR no longer existed. Instead of having a unified nation made up of Soviet republics, we're going to see individual republics, one by one, declaring their independence. The Soviet Union tried to hold on to these republics, but it was too late. These 15 republics soon became independent nations by 1991. The largest of the 15 republics was Russia, and they held a great deal of influence over the other 14 republics, who were much smaller geographically. However, by the early 90s, ethnic tensions began brewing. See, although there were 15 republics in the Soviet Union, there were many different ethnic groups, languages, religions, as well as plenty of nationalistic feelings. Nationalistic groups in each of the smaller republics began demanding self-determination, or self-rule. The first republic to rebel was Lithuania in March of 1990, when they declared their independence. The Soviet government, under Gorbachev's leadership, quickly tried to stop this from happening and sent troops to the Lithuanian capital. The army killed 14 people and wounded many others. Many Soviet politicians openly criticized Gorbachev for this move, including a member of the Soviet parliament named Boris Yeltsin. Yet somehow the Soviet Union stayed together. It became quickly evident to the rest of the world that there was an internal power struggle taking place in the Soviet Union. Old-school communist hardliners began arguing within the government with the reformers. There seemed to be many different groups arguing over power. In August of 1991, conservative Communist Party members detained Gorbachev at his vacation home. They were attempting a coup d'etat, or a military takeover of the government. Remember how Napoleon took over in France following the French Revolution? Yeah, well, the communists tried to overthrow Gorbachev's government and make things the way that they had been before all of his reforms. In response, protesters began protesting in Moscow outside of the parliament building. When the hardliner Communist Party members ordered the military to attack these protesters, the military refused to obey. The communists were forced to step aside and allowed Gorbachev to return to Moscow from his vacation home. The August coup, as it was called, had failed. Gorbachev, though, stepped aside as the leader of the Communist Party. Bear in mind that it was basically his own political party that had attempted to overthrow him and who had detained him at his vacation house. I mean, if your colleagues did that to you at work, would you really want to work with them anymore? Probably not. So Gorbachev stepped aside, and almost immediately, Estonia and Latvia declared their independence. By December of 1991, all 15 republics were independent. For a while, some of the former 15 Soviet republics belonged to a loosely based nation called the CIS, or Commonwealth of Independent States. By December 25, 1991, the Soviet Union was no more. Yeah, so I still remember the Barcelona Summer Olympics in 1992. I was 15, listening to In Excess's Not Enough Time. Side note, sorry. Yeah, and during the opening ceremony, I see a mass of people parading out with a sign that read, the CIS, and my sister and I had a brief discussion about it, like, hey, weren't they just the former Soviet Union? And, ooh, that's weird. Who is this? Anyway, long story short, that leads us to a very relevant digression here. What the heck is a commonwealth anyway? Yeah, I would have asked the same thing at age 15. I probably would not have cared about the answer at that age, but I would have asked the question in class just to annoy my world history teacher. So here goes. A commonwealth of nations is a group of countries that rule themselves independently, all while belonging to some larger group or entity. So Australia is an independent nation today, but is still part of the British Commonwealth. Hey, so is Canada and a number of other nations that have been part of the massive British Empire, hence Queen Elizabeth II on the Canadian dollar, to say the least. Yeah, so once the Soviet Union was no longer the USSR, some of its former republics decided to remain part of a broader group of nations as part of the CIS, the Commonwealth of Independent States. This Commonwealth still exists today, believe it or not, but politically, each of these countries are now politically completely independent, not to mention they all compete under their own nation's flags post-1992 Barcelona Games. Okay, so although they were referred to as the CIS and they still exist today, each former republic is an independent nation with their own governments and leaders. The Commonwealth of Independent States acts as more of a club or alliance of sorts today, experiencing similar challenges as they continue to transition from a nation with a communist or nations with communist economies to more free market and democratic nations. Yeah, so how was this transition, you might ask? Was it easy to go from communism to capitalism or mixed economies overnight? Yeah, well, not so much. In fact, it was pretty rough for many people. For instance, in Russia, which had been the largest of the Soviet republics, the quick shift from communism to capitalism resulted in massive inflation. Their newly elected leader, Boris Yeltsin, wanted to radically reform the formerly command economy. His economic policies became known as shock therapy. He ended government control of businesses, ended government financial support called subsidies, and the results were brutal for the average people. Many savvy entrepreneurs got rich very quickly, but many more people did not enjoy the newfound changes that came along with a capitalistic economy. Many retirees or people receiving government pensions found themselves with no pensions and no way to support themselves. Many people went hungry in the years following independence. Financial hardship led to violence in 1993 when dissidents tried to overthrow Russia's government, including attacks by rebel groups in a province called Chechnya. This was a region controlled by Russia, which wanted its independence. A war ensued, and Yeltsin is going to resign in 1999, and then Vladimir Putin is going to take over as president. He had been the prime minister under Yeltsin and was in charge of domestic affairs. In 2000, he was re-elected as president of Russia. As of 2015, he is still the president of Russia. Yep, there was a brief period where he was prime minister again, and a guy named Medvedev was president from 2008 to 2012. But wow, Putin won election in 2012 and is the president again, and Medvedev is the current prime minister, and forgive my pronunciation. So no confusion there, right? Well, in any event, former Soviet republics like Russia faced many challenges as they transitioned from communism to free market and mixed economic structures. They also have faced numerous challenges as they continue to democratize. A current issue in Russia today is freedom of speech and the overall treatment of the LGBT community in Russia, as well as what some perceive to be unjust jail times for those who defy the government. Right, so along with the Soviet Union breaking apart in 1991, we're also going to see immense changes in other parts of a formerly communist Eastern Europe. Germany reunified in 1990, about a year after the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, launching massive change across Europe and the world. Reunification presented Germany with many of the same challenges that Russia experienced as it transitioned to a new government and economic system. The head of the German government was Chancellor Helmut Kohl. In 1998, Gerhard Schröder became the new chancellor and won re-election in 2002. In 2005, Angela Merkel became the new chancellor. As of June 2015, she is still the chancellor. Germany has made an amazing comeback and leads Western Europe as having the highest GDP, which basically means it has one of the strongest economies. Germany is also second in terms of population with over 81 million people. Russia has the largest European population with 144 million people. Other former satellite nations also became democratic after the Cold War ended, including Czechoslovakia, which split into two separate nations by 1993 called Slovakia and the Czech Republic. In Romania, a totalitarian dictator named Nicolae Ceausescu was overthrown. He and his wife were executed on live TV. It was pretty shocking to see this on the nightly news, I recall. Yugoslavia was another nation to break up following the Cold War, rather. Yugoslavia Yugoslavia was another nation to break up following the Cold War. Yugoslavia had been a communist, non-aligned nation during the Cold War. They are one of the only examples of a place where communism actually worked. How? Well, they had a totalitarian dictator from 1945 to 1980 named Josip Tito. Yugoslavia was made up of all those powder keg of Europe, Balkan Peninsula nations like Bosnia, Slovenia, Serbia, Montenegro, Kosovo, and Macedonia. Yeah, remember Serbia in World War I? Yeah, well, that was all part of that region. Well, Tito had held everything together with communism, and people managed to forget all of their nationalistic differences, language differences, and tendencies, as well as their religious differences. Well, when Tito died in 1980, a Serb named Slobodan Milosevic took over Yugoslavia. Many Yugoslavians disliked the Serb leader being in power. Both Slovenia and Croatia declared their independence in 1991, and this led to a civil war in the nation as the Serbian-led government tried to keep Yugoslavia as a single nation. Croatia and Slovenia remained independent, but then Bosnia also declared its independence as well, and the Serbian-led Yugoslav government did not want to see this happen. The civil war raged on. There were 3 separate religious groups at odds with one another in Bosnia, including Orthodox Christians who tended to be of Serbian ancestry. There were Catholics who tended to be of Croatian ancestry, and Muslims who were Bosnian. Well, the Serbs began instituting a policy called ethnic cleansing, which basically meant that whole villages of Bosnian Muslims were annihilated or murdered. This was a genocide. The international response was a bombing campaign against the Serbs in the late 1990s, and Slobodan Milosevic was put on trial by the UN for crimes against humanity. Today, there is still much tension in the region as a result of the civil war and subsequent genocide. Each of the former Yugoslav republics are independent nations today. Thanks for listening. Bye.